Have you ever met someone in the most unexpected, embarrassing way possible, yet that one moment changed everything? This is the story of Alexander Blackwell, a man whose name carried weight in every boardroom, and Elena Carter, the maid who never thought her life would entangle with a billionaire's heart. Alexander Blackwell was the kind of man who made the world stop when he entered a room. 32 years old, tall, broad-shouldered, and intimidatingly handsome, he had built Blackwell Enterprises into a global empire. His confidence was legendary, his wealth unimaginable, but his heart cold as marble. And then there was Elena. She was the new maid hired just 3 weeks ago, 24 years old, quiet and diligent, her hair often tied into a loose bun, her hands rough from constant work. She came from a small town, working in the city to support her younger brother's college dreams. To Alexander, she was invisible, just another servant in his massive penthouse. At least that's what he thought. It was late one evening when the accident happened. Alexander had just returned from a grueling meeting. His tie hung loose, his suit jacket draped carelessly over one arm. The penthouse was unusually quiet, the staff having finished their duties for the night. But Alexander's mind was restless. He walked through the long marble corridor toward his private study when he heard the faint sound of running water. The guest bathroom door was slightly ajar. Strange. He didn't recall leaving it that way. Curious, he stepped closer. And then the door moved just enough for his eyes to catch the reflection in the mirror inside. Elena. Her hair was wet, water cascading down her bare shoulders, skin glowing beneath the dim bathroom light. She was humming softly, unaware that anyone was near. Alexander froze. His breath caught in his throat. He should have turned away instantly, should have closed the door quietly and left. But he didn't. For just a second too long, his eyes lingered. It wasn't lust. It was something else, something he couldn't define. The maid he had barely noticed before was now someone who made his pulse race. Realizing the danger of his own thoughts, Alexander snapped out of it and turned away, shutting the door quietly behind him. He cursed under his breath. What the hell was wrong with him? He was Alexander Blackwell. He didn't get distracted by maids, but no matter how much he tried to brush it off, the image of her lingered in his mind. The next morning, Elena acted as though nothing had happened. She served breakfast, quietly setting down his coffee, but Alexander noticed the faint blush on her cheeks when their eyes met. Did she know? Did she sense it? He cleared his throat, forcing his voice into its usual cold tone. "You may leave." "Yes, sir," she whispered, her voice trembling slightly. She walked away, but Alexander's eyes betrayed him, following her every step. Days passed, but that one accidental glimpse had done something irreversible. Alexander began noticing details he had ignored before. How Elena always double-checked the locks at night, how she skipped meals so her younger brother could eat, how she worked until her hands shook. He found himself drawn to her presence, against every logical bone in his body. One evening, as he stood by the window overlooking the glittering skyline, he caught Elena dusting the shelves. Their eyes locked in the reflection of the glass. For the first time, she didn't look away. Instead, she held his gaze, her expression a mixture of defiance and vulnerability. Alexander's chest tightened. He quickly turned, masking his emotions with a scowl. "Don't you have work to finish?" "Yes, sir," she said again, but this time her voice carried something sharper. She left, but Alexander knew something had changed. That night, he lay in his bed, restless. He hated losing control, and yet here he was, haunted by the memory. of his maid in the bathroom, haunted by the way she looked at him earlier, for a man who ruled corporations, who intimidated rivals, who crushed deals with a single glance. Why did he suddenly feel powerless in front of her? The next morning, Elena approached him with trembling hands. Her voice cracked as she spoke. "Mr. Blackwell, I need to ask you something. Why were you standing outside the bathroom that night?" Alexander's blood ran cold. Alexander's throat tightened at her words. He had faced hostile investors, cunning rivals, and cutthroat negotiations that could shake global markets, but never had his pulse raced like this. Elena's eyes searched his face, waiting for an answer. He could lie, dismiss it, or snap at her to stay in her place, but something in her trembling voice disarmed him. "I was passing by," he muttered coldly, averting his gaze. "The door was left open. That's all." Her lips parted as if she wanted to challenge him, but instead she nodded. "I see," she whispered, though her tone carried disbelief. She turned quickly, carrying the breakfast tray out of the room. Alexander sank into his chair, furious with himself. Why did he feel the need to justify anything to her? She was just the maid. Just the maid. He repeated the words like a mantra, but they didn't quiet the unsettling guilt in his chest. Over the next few days, the air between them grew heavy. Elena did her work with precision, but she no longer looked at him with downcast eyes. There was a quiet defiance now, a silent awareness that left Alexander restless. Every time she entered the room, his composure cracked. He began noticing how sunlight played on her hair when she opened the curtains, how her hands shook ever so slightly when she poured his coffee. And then came the night he caught her crying. It was close to midnight when he returned from a charity gala, his tie undone, his steps heavy with exhaustion. As he crossed the hall, he heard muffled sobs echoing from the kitchen. He stopped, listening. It was Elena. He peered in and saw her, sitting at the small staff table, clutching her phone to her chest, tears streaming down her face. "Elena," he said before he could stop himself. She gasped, wiping her cheeks hastily, standing so quickly that the chair screeched against the floor. "Mr. Blackwell, I didn't expect you back so soon." "What happened?" His voice was sharper than intended, but his concern was genuine. "It's nothing, sir. Just family matters." She lowered her head, hiding her swollen eyes. Something inside him broke. Alexander wasn't the type to meddle in anyone's personal affairs, but seeing her like this stirred a strange ache. "Tell me," he demanded softly. She hesitated, then whispered, "My brother's tuition fee is due next week. I thought I had saved enough, but it isn't. He might have to leave college." Her voice cracked, and Alexander's chest tightened. He had signed contracts worth billions, tossed away millions like pocket change. Yet here she was, fighting back tears over an amount he could cover without even noticing. But he said nothing. Instead, he studied her, the way she tried to hold her dignity even while breaking inside. "Elena," he said quietly, "why didn't you ask for help?" Her head snapped up, eyes flashing. "Because it's not your responsibility. I work here to earn honestly, not to beg for favors." For the first time, Alexander felt shame pierce his pride. He respected her resolve, her strength. It was unlike anything he had ever seen in the polished women who threw themselves at him. Elena was different, and that difference unsettled him. The next morning, when she came to serve him breakfast, Alexander found himself watching her again, but this time with something more than guilt. There was admiration and something dangerous growing beneath. She felt his gaze and stopped, her hand hovering over the teapot. Her cheeks warmed. "Why are you watching me like that?" she asked softly, her voice barely above a whisper. Alexander's breath caught. He should have denied it, should have brushed it off with icy indifference. But he didn't. He leaned back in his chair, his lips curving ever so slightly. Maybe. Because you're not as invisible as you think. Her heart raced. He could see it in her trembling hands. She lowered her eyes, muttered a quick excuse, and left the room in a hurry. Alexander remained seated, his chest burning with emotions. He hadn't felt in years. He knew this was dangerous, reckless even. But something about Elena was pulling him closer, breaking down walls he had spent a lifetime building. That night, as he stood on the balcony overlooking the glittering city, he heard the soft sound of footsteps behind him. Elena had come to collect the empty glasses. Their eyes met again, and in that moment, the air between them thickened. He took a step forward, unable to resist. "Elena," he said her name like a secret. She froze, her heart pounding so loudly she thought he could hear it. And then, before either of them could say another word, the sound of high heels echoed through the penthouse entrance. A female voice called out sharply, confident and cold, "Alexander, are you home?" Eleanor's face went pale. She stepped back instantly, clutching the tray to her chest. Alexander's jaw tightened, his eyes hardening. It was his fiancée. Alexander's fiancée, Victoria, swept into the penthouse with the confidence of a queen who believed the world belonged to her. Dressed in a crimson gown that hugged her flawless figure, diamonds glittering at her throat, she was the perfect image of power and wealth. Elena lowered her gaze immediately, clutching the tray so tightly her knuckles whitened. She mumbled something about finishing her duties and hurried past Victoria, disappearing into the hallway, but not before Alexander caught the way her shoulders trembled. "Darling," Victoria purred, crossing the room to press a kiss to his cheek. "You didn't tell me you'd be home so early." Alexander forced a smile, but his mind was still on Elena. "I had an early finish." Victoria's sharp eyes swept the room, then narrowed. "Who was that?" "The maid," he said flatly. "Pretty, isn't she?" Victoria's tone carried a touch of amusement, but beneath it, suspicion. "Be careful, Alexander. You wouldn't want the staff to get ideas." He clenched his jaw, irritation flaring. Victoria didn't see people. She saw possessions. Elena was not an idea, not a temptation. She was a living, breathing reminder of everything real, everything pure that his world of glass towers and luxury cars had stolen from him. That night, after Victoria finally left, Alexander found himself pacing the corridor outside Elena's small quarters. He didn't knock, didn't dare, but he stood there, silently, fighting the urge to protect her from a world she never asked to be part of. The next day, he noticed Elena avoiding him. She came and went like a shadow, speaking only when necessary, her eyes never meeting his. It stung more than he cared to admit. He told himself it was for the best, that distance would silence the storm inside him. But the silence was worse than temptation. It was a rainy evening when fate intervened again. Elena was carrying a heavy box of supplies up the service stairs when she slipped on the wet step. The box toppled, and she would have fallen hard if strong arms hadn't caught her mid-air. "Careful," Alexander's voice rumbled low and commanding. Her heart hammered against his chest as he steadied her. For a brief, breathless moment their faces were inches apart, the sound of rain thundering outside. I'm fine," she stammered, pulling back quickly. But her eyes betrayed her, wide and vulnerable, shimmering with something unspoken. Alexander held her gaze, the air between them crackling with a tension neither could deny. "You don't have to carry everything alone, Elena." She swallowed hard, her voice barely audible. "I don't need saving, Mr. Blackwell." But the way she said his name, soft, trembling, almost intimate, sent a shiver down his spine. That Night. Alexander broke his own rule. He poured himself a glass of scotch and sat by the fire, staring into the flames. For the first time in years, he allowed himself to talk, to confess. Elena was quietly cleaning the room when he spoke. "My father built this empire," he said, his voice hollow. "But he never once asked me what I wanted. To him, love was weakness. Vulnerability was failure. So I learned to bury it, to become untouchable." Elena froze, the duster in her hand trembling. She turned slowly, her eyes softening. But even the strongest walls crack eventually. He looked at her then, really looked, and for the first time he didn't feel like Alexander Blackwell, the billionaire CEO. He felt like a man standing on the edge of something terrifyingly beautiful. But just as the silence deepened, just as words threatened to spill from his lips, the shrill ring of his phone shattered the moment. He glanced at the screen. Victoria. He ignored it, but Eleanor had already stepped back, retreating toward the door. "Good night, sir," she whispered, her voice thick with emotions she was too afraid to name. The door clicked shut behind her, leaving Alexander alone with the crackling fire and the pounding of his own heart. He knew then, without doubt, that he was falling, and it terrified him. Elena had been restless for days. She moved through the penthouse like a ghost, her duties completed with mechanical precision, her eyes carefully avoiding his. But inside, she was breaking. She told herself she was foolish, that whatever she was feeling for Alexander was nothing more than a dangerous fantasy. He was her employer. Her world existed miles beneath his, and every glance between them threatened to destroy what little stability she had left. One afternoon, while folding laundry in the staff quarters, she stared at her brother's photo tucked inside her phone case. He was smiling in his graduation gown from high school, full of dreams she had promised to protect. A wave of guilt crashed over her. She couldn't afford distractions, not from Alexander, not from anyone. If she let this continue, it wasn't just her heart at risk, it was her brother's future. That evening she stood outside his study, summoning courage she never thought she had. When Alexander finally looked up from his paperwork, his brows furrowed at the sight of her pale face. "I can't stay here," she blurted out before fear silenced her. The words hit him like a blow. He rose from his chair, confusion and something darker flashing in his eyes. "What do you mean you can't stay here? I need to resign," she whispered, her hands trembling. "This job has helped, but I can't. This place, it's too much. I should go before it turns into something it shouldn't." Alexander's chest tightened. He had faced the loss of billion-dollar contracts without blinking, but the thought of her leaving sent panic clawing at his heart. "Elena, look at me," he said, his voice low, commanding, her eyes lifted, brimming with unshed tears. "I know what you're afraid of," he continued, stepping closer. "And you're right, it's dangerous. But do you think I don't feel it too? Do you think I haven't tried to fight it every single day since that night?" Her breath caught. She shook her head furiously. "You can't say that. You have a fiancé, a life that can't include someone like me." He closed the distance between them, his eyes burning with intensity. "Elena, you're not someone like you. You're the only person who's made me feel alive in years." Her heart thundered, but she forced herself to step back. "This isn't fair, Mr. Blackwell. To me, to your fiancé, to yourself." For a moment, silence stretched between them, heavy with everything unspoken. Then Alexander's expression softened, his voice breaking through the tension. "Don't call me Mr. Blackwell. Not when it's just us." The way he said it, almost pleading, nearly shattered her resolve. But before she could respond, the door to the study flew open. A pair of photographers barged in, flashing cameras. exploding like lightning. Behind them, Victoria's voice rang out like venom. "So this is why you've been ignoring me," she sneered, her eyes narrowing on Elena. "The maid?" Elena froze, mortified. Alexander instinctively stepped in front of her, shielding her from the onslaught of cameras. Rage darkened his features. "Get out!" he barked, his voice thunderous. Security rushed in, dragging the paparazzi out, but the damage was done. Victoria's smirk lingered like poison in the air. Elena's hands shook violently. Tears welled in her eyes, humiliation burning her cheeks. She whispered brokenly, "I told you this would ruin me." And before Alexander could stop her, she turned and fled down the corridor, disappearing into the night. He stood frozen in his study, his fists clenched, his heart torn between fury and desperation. For the first time in his life, Alexander Blackwell had no idea how to fix what had just broken. The penthouse felt hollow without her. For days, Alexander paced the polished marble floors, his mind consumed by Elena's last words. She had vanished that night, leaving behind nothing but her uniform neatly folded on her bed. No forwarding address, no goodbye, no explanation. Just absence, a silence that echoed louder than any confrontation. He tried to bury himself in work, but contracts blurred on the page, and boardroom meetings became meaningless. At night, he stared at the empty halls, haunted by the memory of her laugh, her defiance, her trembling voice. For the first time in his life, Alexander Blackwell, billionaire CEO, untouchable, felt powerless. Meanwhile, Elena sat in a small rented apartment on the other side of the city, clutching her brother's acceptance letter to medical school. She should have felt proud, relieved even, but all she felt was an ache she couldn't name. She replayed Alexander's confession in her mind, the way his eyes had burned when he told her she made him feel alive. And it hurt, because she believed him. She believed every word. But belief didn't change reality. Their worlds were galaxies apart, and she refused to be the reason his empire crumbled. But the world didn't let secrets stay hidden for long. The tabloids exploded with headlines. Billionaire CEO caught in scandal with Maid. Photos splashed across glossy covers, grainy shots of Alexander shielding Elena, Victoria's scornful glare frozen beside them. The media storm was relentless, feeding on every whisper, every rumor. Victoria wasted no time twisting the knife. She stood before the press, painting herself as the betrayed fiancée, the victim of Alexander's reckless lapse in judgment. Shareholders grew restless, questioning his focus, his leadership. Competitors circled like vultures, sensing blood in the water, and through it all, Alexander remained silent. Because none of it mattered. Not the press, not the board, not even Victoria's venom. What mattered was Elena, finding her, explaining that he would burn every headline, dissolve every deal, if only she'd believe that what he felt was real. One evening, he showed up at her old staff quarters hoping for a clue. The room was empty, but on the desk lay a single folded note. His hands trembled as he opened it. "Don't look for me. This is for the best. Forget me, Alexander. Please." He sank into the chair, the paper crumpling in his fist. Forget her. How could he forget the only woman who had managed to see past his armor? How could he forget the way she looked at him, not with fear, not with awe, but with raw honesty? Days turned into weeks. Elena took a job at a diner to stay hidden, her head down, her heart heavy. But one night, as she was wiping tables, she heard the sound of a familiar voice, deep, commanding, impossible to mistake. She turned, and her breath caught. Alexander stood at the entrance, drenched from the rain, his eyes locked on hers as if the entire world had narrowed to that single moment. The diner fell silent. every head turning toward the billionaire CEO, who looked nothing like the untouchable man in the newspapers. He looked human, desperate. "Elena," he said, his voice carrying across the room, low but unwavering. "You can disappear 100 times, and I'll find you 100 more, because I can't do this without you." Her knees weakened, her throat tightened. Every wall she had built, every reason she had clung to, crumbled at his words. But before she could respond, before she could even breathe, another voice cut through the silence. "Alexander Blackwell!" A man's voice boomed from the corner. Elena turned sharply, shock flooding her face. The stranger rose from a booth, his expression grim. "You don't belong here, and neither does she." Alexander's jaw tightened, confusion flashing in his eyes. Elena froze, fear flickering across her features, because the man who had just spoken wasn't a stranger to her at all. He was the very secret she had been hiding all along. The diner felt like it had been plunged into silence. Alexander's eyes narrowed at the man who had spoken, every instinct on guard. Elena, however, looked stricken, her lips trembling, as though the truth she had kept buried was clawing its way out. "Elena," Alexander said slowly, his voice tight. "Who is he?" The man stepped forward, broad-shouldered, dressed plainly, but carrying himself with a confidence that didn't match the room. His eyes locked on Alexander, hard and unflinching. "I'm Daniel Carter," he said firmly. "Her brother." The words hit Alexander like a stone. Her brother? But she had told him her brother was studying, working toward his future. Daniel's expression softened as he turned to Elena. "You didn't tell him, did you? You kept it all from him to protect him." Tears welled in Elena's eyes. She whispered, "I couldn't let anyone know. Not you, Daniel, not him. Not after what happened." Alexander stepped closer, his voice low but steady. "Tell me, Elena. No more running, no more hiding." She took a shaky breath, her heart pounding in her chest. Daniel didn't just need help with tuition. He was forced to walk away from it all when our father's debts swallowed us whole. I came here as a maid, not just for him, but to keep us both safe. I thought if I worked quietly, if I kept my head down, no one would notice us. But then you noticed me." Her voice broke, raw and vulnerable. "And I was terrified. Because for the first time in my life, I didn't just want to survive. I wanted more. I wanted you." The confession landed heavy and beautiful all at once. Alexander's chest tightened, his heart racing with a clarity he had been chasing for weeks. He closed the distance between them, ignoring the stares of the diner, ignoring the rain-soaked chaos of his reputation outside. "Elena," he said, his voice fierce with conviction, "I don't care about your past. I don't care about debts, or scandals, or anything else. I care about you, and if you think I'll let fear or shame take you from me again, you're wrong." The diner seemed to vanish around them, leaving only the sound of his voice and her ragged breaths. Elena's tears spilled freely now, but they weren't just tears of fear, they were of release. "You'll lose everything," she whispered. "The company, your name, Victoria's revenge. They'll never forgive this." Alexander's hand brushed against hers, firm and grounding. "Then let them. What's an empire if it means nothing without the person I love?" The words hung in the air, raw and undeniable. Elena's defenses shattered, and in that moment she let herself lean into him, her forehead pressing against his chest as the weight of her fears melted away. The diner erupted in quiet murmurs, but Alexander didn't hear them. He tilted her chin up gently, and in front of strangers, gossip, and flashing cameras outside the window, he kissed her. It wasn't the kiss of a billionaire claiming a prize. It was the kiss of a man who had finally found home. Daniel watched, quietly, his expression softening. He had spent years shielding his sister, but now, for the first time, he saw someone else willing to carry the weight with her. When they finally pulled apart, Elena's voice trembled, but her words were certain. "Then I won't run anymore." Alexander smiled, something rare and unguarded lighting his face. "Good, because I'm never letting you go." Outside, the rain poured harder, washing the city clean, as if the world itself had decided to start their story anew. And so, what began with an accidental glance, an unintended moment in the quiet of a bathroom, became the love that neither of them expected, but both of them needed.